Amendment by Gomez.
Chair recognizes Ms. Gomez.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members, for allowing us to engage in this thoughtful debate surrounding this topic. This amendment would simply, ironically, add language from a bill that we discussed in depth last year, which is Chairman Patterson's HB 900. This language has already passed the body. However, now we're addressing it in a separate context. This amendment would prevent a book from being banned only because one singular passage was taken out of context. This amendment would add a safeguard to make sure when we're discussing what the community considers as profane or obscene, that we discuss the entire context of the novel or book. We must consider the totality of the circumstances before we move on to suggest a total ban. We all know that today, particularly in the age of social media, it's easy for sound bites or any particular sentence to be taken out of context. With this safeguard, classic books such as Of Mice and Men, The Color Purple, or even the Bible could be banned under a single phrase interpretation, even when their overall message does align with the moral or educational goals of our society. The Supreme Court has repeatedly emphasized that context matters, the totality of the circumstances matter when we evaluate obscenity or offensive material. This amendment simply aligns with that Supreme Court precedent and Texas law.
Speaker.
Mr. Speaker,
Resolved for what purpose?
would the gentlelady yield for some
Gentlelady
questions?
yield for questions.
Yes, Mr.
She
Speaker.
yields for questions.
Thank you, Representative. I hope that the membership is paying attention in here. Your amendment is about taking a work as a whole, right?
Right.
Why is it important to take the work as a whole?
It's important to take the work as a whole because we're talking about banning, we're talking about recommending potential bans on entire pieces of literary work, not just singular bans. This bill suggests that we're not just censoring specific lines in books. This bill suggests that we could remove entire books from libraries. And with simply finding one line or one instance of what someone on this panel considers to be profane or obscene or vulgar. And so it's a very difficult standard to meet. This amendment, and if I could read it, simply says that the committee has to discuss description, depiction, or portrayal of sexual conduct or profane content without considering the full context in which it appears. To the extent possible, we must recognize that contextual determinations are necessarily highly fact-specific and require the consideration of contextual characteristics that may exacerbate or mitigate the offensiveness of the material. So we're saying, please don't ban an entire novel without considering the purpose, the context, the totality of circumstances of the message that this novel is trying to portray.
Very good. So would you consider the possibility that also, if we could adopt this amendment, it would prevent taking words, phrases, or clips, images out of context to wrongfully characterize a work? So I guess the question in this is, have you ever seen words, clips, phrases, or images taken out of context to mischaracterize anything and to stoke a particular narrative?
That's a great question, Representative Rosenthal. I think, unfortunately, we see that every day in social media. Unfortunately, I think some of our colleagues do it to one another, whether it's intentional or not. It's easy to misrepresent when we only hear bits and pieces of the message of what someone's trying to relay. I think we've seen across the state instances where individuals will go up to a mic and start reading one-liners, which independently sound horrific, right? And independently might sound profane or vulgar without informing the community, on the mic, the totality of the circumstances of the message that book is trying to relay. Maybe it was, instances of slavery. Maybe it was lessons on adultery in the Bible. Maybe it was, whatever the full context is, without telling you what that is. Yeah, each one of us can get up here and identify some pretty shocking one-liners in wonderful historical pieces of literature. This amendment says, please don't do that. Please take into consideration thoughtfully, panel of the community, thoughtfully consider the context and the message that we're trying to relay.
Very good. So anyone that knows me at all knows I'm fond of talking about context, and I will even say context is everything. So it's super important to take things in context, including the conversation we're having right now. So can you help me lay out for the body here the benefits of taking a work as a whole as opposed to slicing out pieces for review, and the way that this bill could really open a door to?
Right. The benefit of this amendment is that hopefully we have a panel, and again, this panel, there's no educational barriers for this panel. There's no guidelines as to this panel. You know, do they have to have a PhD? Are they an MD? Are they a JD? Do they have a high school diploma? There are no criteria surrounding this panel. So this amendment simply says, let's slow down and have a thoughtful discussion about the context of the book before we simply recommend that the then elected board of officials ban. Let's make sure that we are engaging in not just a one-liner inquiry, but in a totality of the circumstances, fact-specific inquiry before we go ask our school board to have a very painful discussion about what material to censor from our potential high school children. That's the discussion that I'm asking us to engage in before we recommend that our elected officials take that painful discussion home to have in the community on their televised and broadcast network.
Very good. And
So
for the people in the room, including me, that value actually keeping books on the shelves, how do you envision this amendment helping us keep books on the shelves in our libraries?
I envision that it will make us, and hopefully help the panel, go back to their high school days and remind themselves about how moving their literary masterpieces were when they read, hopefully whether it was an English class or history class, so that they can be taken back to that time and say, you know what, maybe there were some painful paragraphs or a difficult chapter, but the overall context of the book changed my life. So that cost-benefit analysis outweighs the potential, the far-reaching measure of potential censorship. And that's what we're trying to do here, to take us back, to remember how much those books impacted us in our childhood, and what our childhood would have been deprived of had we been censored from reading those literary masterpieces. And with that, I move passage.
Dr. Buckley in opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I appreciate Representative Gomez's amendment and what the intent is, and I would just tell you that in this bill, this sort of deliberation over this content is put in the hands of our parents on the council that take all of these factors into consideration and then take it to a school board for their final ratification of the books on the procurement list. And with that, I respectfully move to table this amendment.
Ms. Gomez to close.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members, and in the spirit of less words, I move passage.
Question occurs on the motion to table. Record vote. Clerk, ring the bell. Dr. Buckley voting aye. Mr. Jones voting nay. Mr. Romero voting nay. Have all members voted? Have all members voted? Mr. King voting aye. 87 ayes, 60 nays. The motion to table prevails. Following amendment, clerk will read the amendment.
Amendment by Cunningham.
Mr. Cunningham.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, this amendment allows school districts to be able to use their instructional material and technology allotment to pay for costs associated with complying with sections 33.023 of SB13. There's no fiscal impact on from this amendment. It allows school districts or open enrollment charter schools the ability to utilize funds already appropriated to meet the requirements. I believe the amendment is acceptable to the author. Move passage.
Mr. Cunningham says of amendments acceptable to the author. Record vote. Clerk, ring the bell. Mr. Buckley voting aye. Mr. Cunningham voting aye. Have all members voted? Have all members voted? 143 ayes, 0 nays. The amendment is adopted. Following amendment, clerk will read the amendment.
Amendment by money.
Mr. Money.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, in the Senate engrossed version of SB13, the Local School Library Advisory Council was mandatory for all districts in Texas. The House CSSB 13 makes the Advisory Council permissive, provided that parents of at least 20% of the enrolled students in the district bring a petition requesting it. I believe that threshold is too high of a bar. My amendment would allow 50 parents in the district to bring a petition and require that at least half of the members of the council be parents who sign the petition.
Mr. Speaker,
For what purpose?
will the gentleman yield
Gentleman
for
yield for
questions?
questions.
I will yield for
He
questions.
yields for questions.
Representative, thank you for bringing this amendment. I was reading the bill and it looked like that the threshold was fairly high. Do you think it's somewhat unattainable to reach the threshold specified in the bill?
I think it's just, as the bill sits right now, it's 20%. Like you, I have some small districts where that would be a very attainable number. But I know that there are districts with tens of thousands of students and would require thousands and thousands of parents to petition, and I think that that's too high. Really, the idea, I understand that the Senate wants to make this a mandatory requirement, and I'm sympathetic to that, but I'm also sympathetic to the small districts who might say, hey, nobody in our community is concerned about this, and it's going to take a lot of volunteer hours to work their way through it. And so what this does is just provide a threshold. If enough parents are interested and concerned, it creates the council, and then those parents that are interested in it kind of have to volunteer to do the work, not just say, hey, somebody ought to look into this.
Right. And so your limit is 50 parents basically have to get involved and say,
That-
hey,
that's right.
there's something wrong. I mean, getting 50 parents to get on board with something, I mean, if you've ever, been involved in a school situation like that, that's a high bar itself, right?
Yeah, and I think it's appropriate bar for enough parents being concerned, but not requiring so much work just to get a petition together. There's a lot of these school district elections where I'm around where it's hard to even get 50 parents to show up to vote on a school board. And so if you can get 50 to sign something saying, yes, I think we need this council, that's good.
Right. Thank you for bringing this amendment.
Thank you.
Mr.
Council
Speaker,
line for what purpose?
would the gentleman yield
Gentleman yield
for
for
a few
questions?
questions?
I will yield for
He
questions.
yields for questions.
Mr. Money, Eagle Mountain Saginaw ISD, which I represent, has 23,369 students. Were you aware of that?
I was not aware of that number, but I'm not surprised there are some districts that size.
So just for clarity, under the current bill, without your amendment, we would have to have 4,673 parents sign a petition in order for that to take place. Is that correct?
Yes, and I think even another part is that it's not just that number, it's a moving number. As more people join the district or leave the district, it might be different. You circulate your petition, and and you're aiming for that number you just gave, and in the meantime, 10 or 15 or 20 more kids show up, and now your petition is inadequate. And so I think this just provides a certainty, an achievable number.
So Fort Worth ISD that I represent has 74,850 students. Are you telling me that without your amendment, there would have to be 14,970 parents to sign that petition?
I trust your math, Mr. Schatzline. It seems like a very unreachable bar, and I think if there's 50 parents in Fort Worth ISD that want to do this, and they presented a petition, that's enough for them to volunteer to do the work.
And in regards to the information to get the petition signed, is that information publicly accessible to parents? How would they even know to do that?
I think that's laid out in the bill. And so this doesn't change that petition requirement. It just lowers the threshold to a more achievable and fixed number.
Thank you, Mr. Money. I think it's a great amendment. I'm really grateful for the bill author and all that you're doing, but I appreciate you.
All right.
So
Mr.
for what
Speaker.
purpose?
Will the gentleman yield for questions?
Gentleman yield for questions.
I will yield for
He
questions.
yields for questions.
I understand you're taking the threshold for 20% of the district to just 50 people, but now you're taking the power away from the school board to determine who is on the council that determines whether the standards are met, and you're saying that whatever 50 parents choose to petition the school board, those are the 50 parents who then become the council?
No, not exactly. Remember, in the Senate version, this is a mandatory council. And so some of our colleagues who have only smaller districts say it may be hard to find parents in the district that want to put in the amount of volunteer work that it's going to take to review all these books. And because of that reason, if there's a small district that wants to, and there's enough parents that are motivated to try to do this, then it would allow those motivated parents to be among the pool of applicants that would make up at least half. If you read it together with the committee substitute, Senate Bill 13, that group of people who petition and say we want this would have to be at half of the people.
So you're taking away discretion from the local school district to say the people who petition have to be on the council that determines whether or not these books are appropriate?
If the school district adopts on their own, then the school district would be able to put the people on that they want. If they require a petition and a group of parents gets together and petitions the district and say, we would like this, then the school board would choose from among those people a certain number that would serve on that committee. It's going to be time intensive. This is not going to be something that every parent is going to want to do. And so it just allows, when I had small children in school and I wanted them to start a new program and I went and said, hey, I think this would be a great program that I'd love for my kids to be involved in. They said, we completely agree. Are you willing to be the coach? And, it's like you need volunteers who are motivated to do that work. And
and you're not just saying that they need to be on as part of the advisory council. You're saying they need to be a majority of the advisory council. The parents who petition to make it happen must be a majority of the advisory council rather than leaving that decision with the local school board.
That's the way it reads.
Thank you.
Thank you. I move adoption.
Mr. Buckley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I appreciate Representative Money bringing this amendment ahead of time and talking about this. And the way the bill currently is, remember that every school board in Texas could form one of these councils right now, okay? And one of the things that I was concerned about was some of our smaller districts being able to assemble a committee that would have the time and the resources to tackle what could be an awesome task in some instances of reviewing these materials. And so that's why we drafted the bill while we did. And I think one of the unintended consequences you could have could be the fact if you take Centerville ISD, for instance, in Trinity County, they have an ADA of 143, where my 20% threshold puts them at 29 parents. They would actually have a higher bar to climb to be able to establish one of these councils. So again, that I believe is what this amendment could do. I'm going to leave this to the will of the House, but I'll be voting against the amendment.
Question occurs. Mr. Money to close.
Thank you very much. Real briefly, the Senate makes this mandatory where school districts don't have any say. The House version creates what I believe is a too high threshold, so just trying to make it an achievable threshold.
Mr. Speaker, will the gentleman yield for questions?
Gentleman yield for questions.
For one question. How are you doing?
He yields for questions.
Thank you. So, Representative Money, you said your amendment just lowers the threshold, but that's not quite accurate, correct?
It doesn't just lower the threshold. It also makes sure that those small districts who only have a few parents that are interested, that the parents who sign the petition better be willing to do the work.
But Representative Money, your amendment also essentially stacks the council just with the people who've signed a particular petition and removes the discretion of the school board to put people that represent the whole community on that council, correct?
The school board's discretion comes if they want to set up the council themselves. If they decide we don't want a council, then the people who do the petition would be able to do it.
So you're creating a race where the first 50 people to sign a petition get to functionally control that council, correct?
No, not necessarily.
Well, Representative Money, I appreciate this. I'm going to go start the petition for my district so we can have the council that approves every single book. Great amendment.
Thank you.
The question occurs on the Money amendment. Record vote clerk ring the bell. So Dr. Buckley voting no. So Mr. Morgan voting aye. Have all members voted? Mr. Jones voting no. Have all members voted? 42 ayes, 101 nays. The motion fails to adopt. Following amendment, clerk will read the amendment.
Amendment by Jones of Dallas.
Mr. Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, this amendment strengthens the author's intent of applying neutral standards to protect communities while preserving a diversity of ideals and people in library materials. This amendment states that when recommending removal, the council shall not recommend removal solely because the ideals espoused by the material or the personal background of the author or characters. Without guardrails, we should expect to see restrictions and removals based on race or sexual orientation of the author or characters. From 2021 to 2022, book challenges were 5 times more likely against authors of color. A quarter of books banned targeted women of color. Over half of books challenged in 2024 featured characters of colors or LGBTQ characters. Members, there are 3 primary reasons why this amendment is critical. 1, school libraries already abide by these standards. 2, this helps the bill meets constitutional scrutiny, as already mentioned. And 3, this amendment protects the council against politicalization. Members, this amendment assists the bill with accomplishing its intent. I urge you to vote in favor of this amendment.
Rouse for purpose.
Mr. Will the gentleman yield for some questions?
Gentleman yield for questions?
Yes.
He yields for questions.
Thank you for this amendment, Representative Jones. Could you tell me why is this amendment necessary? Aren't books removed for inappropriate content, not for who wrote them?
Absolutely. So in theory, yes, but in practice, many recent books have been targeted by authors because of their identity or their perspective, even when the content is educationally appropriate. For example, books by LGBTQ authors or authors of color are often disproportionately challenged, not for explicit materials, but for who they are or what they represent with the content.
Yes, I agree with you. And in theory, it sounds good that it's okay for communities to decide what aligns with their values, but could you elaborate on how that can be a bad thing?
Absolutely. Well, I think if we listen to the arguments that we're listening to on this very floor, we have to acknowledge the very important and critical conversation about what is age appropriate for our children. We're having the same conversations that we're having for high schoolers based on kindergartners. And I think that this conversation around age appropriateness is very, very important. And I think that it's also important that we cannot have content that is removed just based on someone's political preference or someone's preference that a book or an author does not need to be in a library.
That's right. So last question, could this amendment be misused to protect books with harmful content?
I think it can. I think that when we start making these judgments on content, we can really miss the goal of what we're trying to do, which is protect our children. I think ultimately, if we are trying to protect our children, we need to give them age-appropriate education so that they can navigate this world in a safe and secure way. But we continue to put legislation forward, another book bill forward, that instead of educating our children, we're trying to ban our children. And we know how that has worked in the past when we have tried to limit age-appropriate conversations with our children and having these necessary conversations with our children versus just trying to create another blockade to prevent them from getting the information that they need to navigate life successfully.
Thank you, Representative. I'll be supporting your amendment.
Thank you so much.
Go for a purpose.
Will the gentleman yield?
Gentleman yield for questions.
I do.
Yields
Thank
for
you.
questions.
Representative Jones, do you know that at one point in time, books that were written by Dr. Martin Luther King would have been banned under this based upon a community and its use?
Absolutely. When we look at civil rights leaders, other leaders in our society, I would dare say if this was, the current time, and those individuals that works from them would be banned. And we have seen, not only in our society, but other societies, of just, the limitations of books and the bannings of books based on political agendas versus what's right and what's necessary, and what, again, I think everyone has been saying that have proposed amendments, what is age appropriate for our children to learn and engage it with. So I would definitely agree. And we've seen books banned by, civil rights leaders such as, Martin Luther King. And, we're going to continue to see that with bills like this that are continue to be passed by this body and in this state.
And I'm glad you brought that up. When we're talking about banning books of civil rights leaders, would you consider, or do you know that he has been considered, James Baldwin has been considered a civil rights leader?
Absolutely.
And do you know that some of his books have been banned?
Oh, absolutely.
And what about Bayard Rustin?
Another one.
So in some instances, what we could be doing is neglecting people from knowing the actual history of what has happened to people who've been oppressed.
I think it's important to realize it's not what could be happening, it's what is happening. And we are seeing that just because we disagree with someone's position or even their background, that we are putting laws like this forward to be able to put these bans in place. So I'm definitely not surprised, and I think that that's why so many members are raising the concerns that they are today with, once again, another book that is limiting content and using children as the reason why this is being done.
And then also, lastly, I know we had talked earlier in this session about the rise in anti-Semitism.
Excuse me, Mr. Speaker, I cannot hear.
Members, please take your conversations outside the rails.
We've talked about the rise in anti-Semitism that's also happened in the country. Would this bill, without amendments like these in here, would this allow people to be able to bar books that are teaching about what happened during the Holocaust to people?
Absolutely. Since we have seen the emergence of these book banning bills, which there are a series of them over the last 5 or 7 years, we see that, and I would hopefully say the unintended consequence is the banning of a history in our country. And sometimes it's not a pretty history, but I think that we have to make sure that we tell the truth and we make sure that it is done in an age-appropriate, respectful way, but we continue to stick to the facts of this country, because if we don't learn from our mistakes, we're doomed to repeat them.
Thank you. So just to make sure, this amendment is just clarifying and making sure that we're not banning authors, but we're banning or making sure that we're looking at content, since already they can do that. We're not trying to erase history. We're not trying to force people to read things. We're saying that they should be available, and we shouldn't be targeting specific people because they have been targeted in the past.
Absolutely. I think one of the most important things is that we are not banning materials based on political position. We are finding ways to create neutral standards for putting the guardrails in place for banning books, so that we do not unintentionally remove the history or perspectives of key populations in this country, such as people of color or LGBTQ authors and content, from now our public libraries. Last session, we went for our public school libraries, and now we're coming back for another round to attack our public libraries.
Thank you so much, and thank you for protecting history and what people should be able to read.
Thank you, Representative Manuel.
Plus, for what purpose?
Does the gentleman yield for some questions?
Gentleman yield for questions?
Absolutely.
Yields for questions.
Representative Jones, you're familiar that my family came here from communist Romania. Is that correct?
I believe I've heard that a time or two from you.
And did you know that at the time when the communists took over Romania, that they started banning books? Are you familiar?
I think we see, I didn't know necessarily that scenario, but I think we've seen several times throughout history the takeover of a country or the takeover of someone's identity started with the banning of their culture, starting with books and other important documented content.
Absolutely, and that's why I find your amendment so interesting, because the way that the communist regime started banning books, they actually first started banning children's books, and they did that through the commission of the Ministry of Culture. The Ministry of Culture started going through and editing all the different types of books that the people of Romania could start reading. Do you see a similarity between what the communist regime of Romania was doing and SB13?
Absolutely, and I think that that's what's the most concerning to me. When I started hearing about book bans, I immediately thought back to history and how we've seen these book bans. And my question is, like, what are we going to do next? Go on the South Lawn and set it all on fire? I mean, that follows history.
And I think that's why your amendment is so important to be attached to this bill, because essentially that's what we're creating. We're creating committees that will tell us, yes, this is approved and this isn't approved. Representative, did you know that in Romania, children were required to report on teachers who introduce inappropriate literature? Do you see that that might be a slippery slope of what we're doing now?
I think it definitely is a slippery slope, and be very careful because someone may be listening to you for a bill for next session.
And under the communist regime, even fairy tales were rewritten to reflect political ideologies. Is SB13 not the first step towards a future where literary content must conform to government-approved themes to remain on the shelf?
I think that's a very valid concern that we're seeing, and I think that's why so many people have such an opposition to this
Gentleman's
legislation.
time has expired.
Thank you so much. I move adoption.
Dr. Buckley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I appreciate Representative Jones bringing this amendment forward, and if I'll draw your attention to page 2 of the bill that requires that that the standards adopted under the section must include collection development policy that they cannot prohibit the removal of material based solely on ideas contained in the material or personal background of the author of the material or characters in the material. And with that, I respectfully move to table the amendment.
Mr. Jones to close.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move adoption.
Question occurs on the motion to table. Record vote. Clerk, ring the bell. Show Dr. Buckley voting aye, Mr. Patterson voting aye. Mr. Kane voting aye. Have all members voted? 87 ayes, 56 nays. The motion to table prevails. Following amendment, clerk will read the amendment.
Amendment by Patterson.
Mr. Patterson.
Mr. Speaker,
Taleriger, for what purpose?
I raise a point of order against further consideration of the Patterson Amendment under Rule 11, Section 2 on the grounds that the amendment is not germane.
Bring your point of order down.